You're honestly kind of low class compared to my ex. My girlfriend, Brooke, said it casually. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sneer. She just sat there on the couch, the muted TV casting flickering shadows across her face, took another slow sip of her Cabernet, and delivered the insult like she was commenting on the humidity. Hello, I'm Alex. I work in logistics, predictable, structured, data-driven. I value stability. I'm not flashy. Brooke, 28, works in event planning, dynamic, image-conscious, highly reactive. We had been together almost 2 years. We had shared an apartment for 8 months. I had tolerated the differences, the irritation, the micro-corrections of my pronunciation, the sharp jabs dressed up as teasing. I thought it was just the stress of a demanding job. Until that Thursday night. The inciting incident was innocuous. I had made a harmless comment about her friend's new boyfriend, something standard about him seeming decent. Brooke had been irritable all week, and that was the trigger she needed. She laughed sharp, dismissive, and laden with contempt. "You would think that," she said, her eyes still on her phone. "What does that mean?" I asked, though my gut already knew the answer. She finally looked up, sighed the way you do when a child has repeatedly failed a simple task, and took a deep breath. "It just means you don't really get how different worlds work." At that moment, the logistics part of my brain signaled. Stop, danger. Do not engage. But another part of me needed clarity. I asked her to explain. What did she mean by different worlds? That's when she set down her wine glass and leveled that devastating comparison. She told me she had been holding it in for months. Ryan, the ex, operated on a different level. He knew the right restaurants, the right people, the right way to command a room. He had presence. According to her, when Ryan walked in, people respected him. With me, she felt like she had settled for comfortable stability. For 2 years, I had built a life with this woman, and in one sentence, she had retroactively reduced it to me being a secondary, inferior choice. I holds a mirror up to Ryan, idealized, perfect, a standard of high class, and held me against it, and I was found wanting. What she didn't realize was that I knew about Ryan. I knew he was flashy, charismatic, and impressive. I also knew he had systematically cheated on her throughout their entire relationship. In psychological terms, this is a dangerous manifestation of relationship contempt, often called one of the four horsemen of relationship apocalypse by researchers like John Gottman. Contempt is defined by disrespect, mockery, and the inherent assumption of superiority over one's partner. When contempt enters the dynamic, the relationship is no longer a partnership. It is a hierarchy. I looked at Brooke, expecting the standard softening, the laugh, the "I didn't mean it like that." It didn't come. She stared back with absolute certainty in her assessment. In that quiet moment, something in me shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was finality. I didn't defend my career. I didn't remind her who pays the majority of the bills. I just nodded slowly and calmly replied, "You're right." She blinked, her eyes widening slightly, entirely unprepared for my agreement. Before she could regain her footing, I added the necessary clarification. "You're right, he does have all that. At least I never cheated on you like he did." The room went profoundly silent. Her face tightened. The idealization of Ryan had just collided with the memory of his core flaw. I didn't stay to watch her process the contradiction. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the front door. Annoyance rather than concern flavored her final call as the door opened. "Where are you going?" I turned back once. "Somewhere I'm not being compared," I said, and I walked out. I drove aimlessly for about 20 minutes. I didn't play music. The only sound was the low hum of the tire on the asphalt and that devastating sentence replaying itself in my head. Low class. That single insult had transformed our 2-year history into a permanent flaw of character rather than a relational conflict. This felt less like a standard breakup and more like a final audit. Comparison in relationships is often a trap, but using it as a permanent measurement of a partner's intrinsic worth is psychological demolition. I pulled into a dimly lit gas station, parked near the edge of the lot, and just sat there in the silence. My hands were on the steering wheel, and I noted with detached interest that they weren't shaking. I felt clear. I felt grounded. The logistics part of my brain had analyzed the situation and arrived at the only possible conclusion. If this story of establishing an ironclad boundary resonates with you, or if you have ever felt like you had to shrink to make a partner feel superior, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It directly helps Story Sparks grow and continue creating deep dives into human behavior and emotional intelligence. Now, let's get back to the aftermath of that Thursday night. My phone buzzed. It was Brooke. Brooke, you're being incredibly dramatic, Alex. Come back. No apology. No, I am so sorry, that came out completely wrong. Just irritation that I had refused to absorb the attack. A minute later, before I could even lock the screen. Brooke, you know I didn't mean it like that. This is the universal translator for, I meant exactly what I said, but I am now facing the immediate, inconvenient consequences of my words. I drove to my best friend Mark's apartment. Mark is a man who understands how to hold space without filling it with empty advice. He handed me a beer, nodded at the couch, and let silence do its necessary work. Later, I told him what she said, exactly how she said it. Contempt has a very distinct sound. He frowned, paused, and offered the only commentary needed. Man, you don't say that to someone you respect. Respect. That word landed with more force than the insult itself. Around midnight, my phone lit up with missed calls, voicemails I didn't listen to. I knew the algorithm. Tonight would be annoyance. Tomorrow morning would be panic. I slept on Mark's couch, staring up at the shifting patterns of streetlights on the ceiling, realizing a hard truth. I hadn't walked out Thursday night because I was angry. I walked out because I finally refused to shrink to fit her idealized image of high class. Alex's response is a strong display of self-differentiation, the ability to maintain your own sense of self-worth separate from the invalidation or reactivity of a romantic partner. By refusing to engage in a defensive argument, he validated his own standard of respect. I woke up Friday morning on Mark's couch to the scent of burnt coffee and the sound of his dog pacing the kitchen floor. For a few blissful seconds, I forgot where I was. Then the entire reality rushed back, her voice, casual and cutting, like she was finally doing us both a favor by saying the quiet part out loud. My phone was face down on the coffee table. When I picked it up, it buzzed immediately, almost angry at being ignored. Missed calls. Messages sent hours apart, each one shifting tone like a desperate negotiation. Brooke, can you come back so we can talk about this like adults? Brooke, you seriously left over one comment. You are proving my point. Brooke, I was just being honest. That last one, I was just being honest, is the common shield of high-conflict personalities. It allows a person to use emotional cruelty as a weapon, while simultaneously reframing any reaction to it as insecurity or a refusal to face the truth. But there is a massive chasm between constructive honesty and contemptuous mockery. I didn't reply. I showered, borrowed a t-shirt, and went to work. Sitting at my desk felt surreal. I was executing my logistic functions, answering emails and nodding through project updates, all while something monumental quietly collapsed in the background of my life. At 10:06 a.m., Brooke arrived. My phone rang immediately after, her name flashing with a sudden localized emergency. I didn't answer. A minute later, a text. Brooke, I'm outside your building. It wasn't a request. It was an assertion of presence. No, can we please talk? No, I am out here whenever you are ready. Just I'm here, implying I was expected to immediately accommodate her. I stayed where I was. At 10:16 a.m., another message arrived. Brooke, this is ridiculous, Alex. I said one thing you didn't like and you just ran away. That confirmed it. She genuinely didn't understand the depth of the violation. In her mind, her low-class assessment was just another objective truth she was entitled to share. My reaction was the actual ridiculous problem. Around noon, she sent a voice memo. I listened to it against my better judgment. She sounded tired, slightly wounded, but primarily annoyed. She talked about how real relationships require thick skin, how no one is perfect, and how Ryan had never taken things so personally. The comparison again. She couldn't stop holding him up as the gilded yardstick, and my biggest crime was simply not measuring up to a standard that included systematic betrayal. I deleted the voice memo halfway through. I didn't feel angry. I felt definitive. By the time I clocked out, I knew with complete certainty that I wasn't going back to that apartment to apologize for being insulated. And I was also pretty sure she still expected me to. Brooke is employing a tactic known as DARVO, deny the behavior, attack the victim for responding, and reverse the victim and offender roles. By labeling Alex as dramatic or sensitive, she is attempting to invalidate his healthy boundary and reclaim control of the relationship narrative. I went back to the apartment that evening. I knew she'd be there. Her car was in the lot, angled slightly crooked, the way she always parked, too busy thinking about the next thing to correct the wheel. I noticed that detail not with endearing affection, but with clinical detachment. When I opened the door, she was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling on her phone, acting as if she owned the air in the room. She didn't look up immediately. "So," she said eventually, "you calm now?" I set my keys down slowly. I wasn't upset. She scoffed, finally looking up with eyes already narrowed for the fight she expected. "Right, because you always storm out when you're totally calm." I walked past her, grabbed a glass, and poured some water, leaning against the counter. "Brooke, there is a difference between honesty and contempt," she snapped. "Oh my God, Alex, you are so sensitive. I can't say anything to you." Ryan would have laughed that off. The idealized ghost of Ryan again. "Ryan cheated on you for years," I said, my voice as flat as a log file. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes flashed with sudden rage. "At least he wasn't insecure about it." I nodded once. I wasn't agreeing with her absurd statement. I was agreeing that the data set was finally complete. The standard was clear. She idealized Ryan's flash while minimizing his core betrayal, and she condemned my steadiness as comfortable and inferior. The logistics brain had arrived at the final calculation. Contempt is a relational zero-sum game. The only way to win is to not play. I walked past her into the bedroom. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started taking shirts on hangers. "What are you doing?" she asked, standing in the doorway now, her voice tight with panic dressed as anger. "Unpacking," I said. "For what?" "Alex, you do not just end a 2-year relationship over one honest sentence. Couples fight. Adults figure it out." "I'm not leaving because of an honest sentence, Brooke," I said calmly, folding my shirts with precise logistical efficiency. "I am leaving because of how incredibly easy it was for you to say it." She laughed, sharp, tight, disbelieving. "You always do this. You always run. You're just proving my point, you know that." I zipped the bag and slung it over my shoulder. "No," I said, "I'm actually disproving it. I am not waiting around to be compared to a benchmark that included systematic disrespect." She followed me to the front door, still talking, still reframing herself as the mature one in the room. The narrative she needed to maintain was paramount. "You'll regret this," she said as my hand touched the handle. "You always come back." I paused and looked at her one final time. I wasn't angry, I was finished. "Maybe tomorrow, Brooke, but not tonight." And I walked out, knowing something fundamental had ended, even if her ego hadn't caught up to the consequences yet. I didn't stay at Mark's place that Friday night. I didn't want the questions, the quiet sympathy, or the company. I needed perspective. I slept in my car, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I needed an uncomfortable physical reality to match the emotional landscape. I parked a few blocks away from our apartment building, reclined the passenger seat, and stared at the ceiling liner of my sedan. The city hummed around me, distant sirens, traffic, people living their continuous lives while my own structure lay in ruins. Around 1 a.m. my phone began its inevitable vibration. "Brooke," I let it ring. At 1:37 a.m. the text arrived. "Brooke, you're really doing this, over a comparison. You're acting like I physically attacked you. At 2:05 a.m., the Standard minimized apology. Brooke, I didn't mean it the way you are taking it. You know I love you, Alex. Don't be like this. I stared at that message and realized that if I knew what she meant, then she knew exactly how it sounded. I turned the phone off. The logistics brain was running a final scenario analysis. Stay and negotiate my worth for the next decade, or leave and protect my self-respect permanently. The calculation was not complicated. If you are still listening, you are likely finding value in how Alex processes this emotional trauma. Please consider subscribing to Story Sparks to join a community dedicated to emotional intelligence and resilience. Now let's see what happened when Brooke realized this was not a standoff, but an ending. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of quiet that feels earned. No notifications, no texts, no social media debris. Just silence. It didn't feel explosive, it felt settled. I left my phone on Mark's counter while we made breakfast. Mark, again, asked nothing. We discussed coffee bean varieties and the logic of his dog's fetch strategy. It was grounding. When I finally picked up my phone around noon, the voicemail notification was already waiting. I shouldn't have listened. I knew what it would be. I did it anyway. Brooke's voice was softer, not apologetic, careful, like she was navigating a room filled with invisible glass. Alex, okay. I think this got way out of hand. I'm at the apartment. Can we please just talk? I want us to figure out what this means. Figure out what this means. Like the relationship was still an intact asset, just temporarily inconvenient. I drove to the apartment. I wasn't going to reconcile. I was going to collect the rest of my things. When I opened the front door, she was sitting on the couch, wrapped in one of my oversized hoodies. The moment she saw me, her expression shifted with a terrifying speed from relief to instant irritation when she realized I wasn't offering a smile or an apology. You could have answered your phone, she snapped. I've been panicking. I didn't want to talk, I said, heading straight for the bedroom. She followed me into the small, shared space. You're acting like I'm some kind of monster, Alex. Couples fight. We say things when we are stressed. Couples don't insult their partners by comparing them to an idealized, cheating ex, Brooke, I said, pulling my suitcase down from the top shelf. This isn't a fight. This is a data point. That made her snap. The careful facade was gone. Oh, please, she scoffed, crossing her arms. You are not done. You are just sulking because your ego is bruised. You always do this when you feel inferior. I stopped packing. I turned to look at her. Inferior. You keep using that word like it's a standard. I've failed, Brooke, not an insult you threw at me. It's not an insult, Alex. It's an assessment. Ryan operated on a high level. He was ambitious. You are comfortable. There it was, for the last time, the ranking, the contempt. I zipped the final suitcase. I slung it over my shoulder and picked up the larger duffel bag. So that's it, 2 years and you are just walking away from us. No, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. I walked away Thursday night. This is just the logistical cleanup. She stared at me, the confusion finally manifesting in her eyes. The ego couldn't compute a scenario where I wasn't negotiating. As I walked out with the final bag, she was still standing in the doorway of the bedroom. I didn't say goodbye. And as I closed the apartment door behind me, I realized something important. Sunday morning was not going to fix this. It was just going to extend the auditing process. I didn't win. I didn't get revenge. But as I loaded the final bag into my trunk and looked back at our apartment building, I knew I had done the one thing she hadn't anticipated. If you are finding depth in Alex's process, hit that subscribe button. We are on a mission to reach 100,000 subscribers and bring these detailed, valuable narratives to the people who need them. Your engagement makes this channel possible. Now, let's wrap this up. Tuesday morning felt different, not dramatic, just settled. I realized I had stopped replaying the conversation. No imaginary arguments, no mental drafts of what I should have said. The logistics part of my brain had closed the case file. I passed our favorite coffee shop on my commute. She always said it was beneath her, but she liked that the barista knew how she liked her drink. I stopped in anyway. The barista smiled and asked about my weekend. Quiet, I said, and I meant it. By Wednesday morning, the relationship was officially over, without a final conversation, without a dramatic fight, without a last-ditch effort on her part. And that silence told me more than any apology could have. She wasn't fighting for me. She was fighting for her preferred narrative, and when she couldn't control my reaction, the argument held no value for her. I heard later from a mutual friend that Brooke was shocked by how quickly it ended, that she never imagined one comment could undo 2 years. But it wasn't one comment. It was the absolute ease with which she said it, the contempt that fueled it, the certainty she had that I would simply absorb the insult, recalibrate my expectations, and stay so long as she stayed. I went back to my normal routines. I dated casually for a while, slowly, without the sense of urgency. I stopped pretending that comfortable stability was a fatal flaw. I stopped pretending that loyalty had to compete with flash. I stopped pretending that love was supposed to feel like a constant audition for a role I had already earned. I never heard from her again, not directly. The last thing I saw was another Instagram post, weeks after I left. It was a mirror selfie with another vague, motivational quote about outgrowing people who are committed to understanding you. Ryan liked it again. I smiled, locked my phone, and went about my logistic day. When she called me low class, she was trying to establish a hierarchy, but she accidentally gave me clarity. And when I walked out calmly Thursday night, refusing to defend my worth against an idealized ghost, I took something she didn't expect to lose. I took myself. Sometimes relationships don't end with shouting or betrayal. Sometimes they end in the very moment you realize you no longer need to prove your value to someone who is determined not to see it. Thank you for watching this deep analysis of comparison, contempt, and the quiet power of self-respect. If this story provided value, a spark for your own reflection, hit that subscribe button right now. Do not be part of the 97% who watch and leave. Join the Story Sparks community. We have 2 other narratives on the screen right now about navigating complex relationship dynamics. Click one of them to keep the momentum of emotional intelligence going. I will see you in the next story. Stay steady, stay differentiated, and protect your peace. Bye-bye.